I always remember when YouTube was down for like a day. That was terrifying.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think we are live now for sure. So,
Awesome.
welcome, Jack, to another episode of our series of recruiting tips and trips that we've been doing every week with a different recruiter at Codecademy. Today is your time to shine. So, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, a little bit of background?
Yeah, no, thanks, Fede, for having me and for doing all these. Yeah, in terms of who I am, my name is Jack Kryznefski. That is just a gobbledygook of a last name, but it sounds easier when you say it. I'm a business recruiter here at Codecademy. I've been a recruiter literally my whole career, even before I graduated college. Working on everything, under the sun in terms of everything non-technical to technical roles, doing international staffing and all that stuff. And yeah, no, I've been here at Codecademy now for 6, 7 months. So yeah, no. And one of the big things for me though, if it wasn't readily apparent by the topic of this, is culture and values. I think it's really crucial that someone has a good understanding before they join an organization as to what their culture is, what their values are, and how they can add to it, or if it's right for them.
All right. I think my right off the bat, I'm already wondering how often do you come across candidates that mention that? I mean, I'm assuming that when you are doing phone screens, there might be some time for them to ask you questions. How often do you find candidates that worry about that? That say, "Hey, yeah, I'm worried about your values, or I'm worried about the culture. I'm worried about the things that drive this company, the mission."
Yeah, actually, it's really funny. Literally right before this, someone asked me that question during a phone call. It comes off. I'm gonna say probably comes up about almost every single phone interview we as recruiters have, and it comes up usually during some hiring manager screens that we do. It is always at the forefront of what candidates are thinking about, in terms of they want as much insight as possible into what that team is. The way they phrase the question usually differs though, but it's all the same thing. It's usually around what's the team like, how would you describe the team dynamic, what's the culture there. The values don't come up as much, but they always kind of hint at like, oh, like what are the things that drive the team forward, what are like the guiding principles. I would say it's almost a daily occurrence. And if there's a day that doesn't happen, I grow concerned because that means like what has happened,
Hmm.
right? But it's always usually interesting when someone actually says it at the very beginning of the conversation, because we do save time at the end to answer any questions. But people sometimes right off the bat is like, I want to know, what's this team like? Can you tell me more about the team, the dynamic, who this reports to, how many people are on the team, and how do they all work together? So it's very common.
So does that all fit into that category of culture, missions, values? If somebody asks you, "Oh, what is a typical day there at the company like?" Or, "Oh, what's your favorite part about working with your teammates?" Or so I'm assuming that those are all kind of like in that category of like trying to gauge what it's like to be a teammate at that place.
Yeah. No, and I would say like it sounds silly, but the typical day one is also does really well felt fall into that culture piece, right? What is the culture of this organization? Because if someone responds with, well, we're all up at 5 a.m., we're working till 8 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night, that usually shows that that's the type of culture they have. That's the work environment they have.
Yeah.
They're early birds, or they stay up late kind of thing. Or in terms of where people are sometimes located, or just the habits that the employees have, like, oh, I never log off, we're all online like the moment we get up kind
Mm-hmm.
of thing. And if that's not what you're looking for, that's a great way to understand, like, okay, their typical day to day doesn't line up with me because X, Y, and Z. Maybe I have to take care of my kids in the morning or at night. I'm doing night classes. So it's all of it falls underneath culture, because the values help drive the culture of the organization. Like, they're those north stars that you follow, and everything kind of trickles down from that. So if there
Mm-hmm.
is a value that is kind of leads that culture in that direction of like, oh, hey, we are people that, like, we don't rest until there's perfection.
Yeah.
You kind of have that, like, oh yeah, we literally might not rest until there's perfection kind of thing. Like, we put in the blood, sweat, and
Yeah.
tears now, so then we can rest once it's launched. So it all ties into the overall culture, and the work-life balance is ties into it, as well as even just what's your favorite part. If you cannot answer that question honestly and quickly, that means maybe something's wrong with the culture there. Or if the interviewer,
Okay.
like, you're talking to says, "Oh, you gotta let me think about that," and they don't go, "Well, I love so many things right after," slightly concerning, because there should always be something that gets you up in the morning as an interviewer, as a member of that team, right? And all those pieces kind of like almost like Lego bricks stacked together to create the full holistic picture of what the culture is and what the values of the organization are.
I mean, now that you're mentioning things that people say, now I'm curious, is that is there like a code? Is there a way for the learners watching this or the people that will watch it in the future? Is there like a little bit of a code of how to translate what people say? Like you're in an interview and you ask, what's the culture like there? Or like, what's a day like? And somebody says, oh, we are all very perfectionists and we really like to do our work well. Does that mean we don't have work boundaries and expect Slack DMs at 7:30 p.m. and your weekends, by the way, are forfeit? Is there like a do you feel like there's like a common language where some people can get some cues out of those, or oh, we all get along really well as long as you follow the rules, or whereas like that's code for saying we are very strict on things, or like listen to your boss? Is that like, is there things that help you decode these kind of taglines, I guess?
Yeah, no, there's definitely those little things that should prompt follow-ups, because just because someone says my favorite part of the company is X, or we work like Y, you should always have a follow-up question ready to go, because it's an interview, it's a conversation more than anything. As much as the company's interviewing you, you're interviewing them to determine, is this a place I can see myself being at and myself contributing to? So as much as if an interviewer asks you a question, they ask you a follow-up, same thing for them. This is your chance to ask follow-ups of, let's use that, like, am I going to get a Slack at 7:30 at night, 9 o'clock at night? Am I expected to pick up the phone if they call at any point? If someone's like, oh yeah, like, my management style is I expect 100% from my employees, don't be afraid to follow up. Like, well, what does 100% look like for this role? Right. When, let's talk about the overall, like, for example, are we doing, what are our sprints looking like? And start tying it back to the position, right? Not just make it come off unfounded where it's like, oh, that's a little, I'm going to take his word that we put 100% in, or her word that we put 100% in, but let's dig into that. What does that mean for this role? Are that maybe the expectations being a bit more lofty? Is actually there's a bigger position than I know that I'm actually interviewing for? Are they expecting someone who can do way more than I'm capable of, and am I being potentially set up for failure? But then on the reverse side of things, there's the positive things. If someone says we're extremely collaborative, or that we strongly believe in the mental health of our employees, follow up like, well, what does that mean? What does effective collaboration in your team look like? Or what does a good work-life balance look like? Because a lot of companies do say, and I think anyone watching this would say, they probably heard, oh, we really do cherish work-life balance. Definitely in today's age of the pandemic, there's a lot of mental burnout. A lot of people are probably focusing on that. And if you can't go, well, how do you empower your team or this role to make sure they have a healthy work-life balance? What does that look like to you? And if they can't give you like a concrete answer or their philosophy, start having additional follow-up questions of, okay, well, this is what my thoughts are. Have a dialogue about it.
I mean, that's probably tough for a lot of our learners. I know that they are either career switchers or they're trying to break into tech for the first time. And I know that with being a beginner or applying for junior roles, there comes this sense of urgency where you say, look, any job, like whoever picks up the phone, that's the company I'm going to work for. And your bar is very low because you just feel like you have a bit of imposter syndrome. Maybe you don't deserve it. You're not ready. So anyone that gives you a shot, you're more likely to say yes. What's the etiquette? If you're thinking as a beginner and saying, well, I don't want to do anything wrong. I don't want to shoo away from this job. Maybe it's the only call I'm going to get all month. What would you say is the etiquette of, like, okay, you said that follow-up questions are good. In your experience talking through a recruiting process, how much can you ask, or how far can you ask follow-up questions before you're maybe crossing a line that is going to, red flag the recruiter as well?
And actually, it's funny that you mentioned that, like, for people looking to break into their career, because that's actually why I wanted to do this topic, is because I think people are afraid to discuss culture. They're like, I will just be happy to be part of a team. You shouldn't be thinking that way. You should be thinking about the long term. Like, okay, maybe you'll be happy in that moment, maybe the first 3, 4, 5, 6 months, right? But eventually, it's gonna, that the culture, the values they hold themselves to could be detrimental to not only your mental health and potentially even physical health, but also the long-term expectations of your career, right? A good mentor, if you don't have that, could be, could be a negative towards your actual growth. But then when tying it back to the, like, how far is too far when it comes to follow-ups, is the 2-question rule. I like to say it is like asking 2 follow-ups if you don't feel like you're getting quite your answer. Because if you don't think that culture makes sense for you, as much as you may want to work for that company, or like, oh, I just want that X amount of experience just so I can break in, is that just gonna be detrimental though, that experience, right? Let's say you are going to be rolling the dice potentially. Oh man, I'm gonna do some really good things that in a year from now, I can be X, Y, or Z. You shouldn't be asking that to yourself, right? So when you ask these questions, it should be, I don't want to be leaving this company in a year. That should be the focus. So if someone goes, oh yeah, we're trying to work on, if they're very transparent, we're trying to work on our work-life balance here. That's why we're growing so much. Ask them, oh, you're growing so much. What does your work-life balance look like right now? Or if they go, oh, we don't really have, a common one that you hear is, hey, what does career growth look like for this role? And they go, oh, we don't have that defined yet. That's a great place to ask a lot of follow-up questions, because this is your chance where I like to say there is no negative line you can cross, in that you're showing that ambition, but also always keep in mind that they are still interviewing you. If this is a company you really want to work at, everything you've heard sounds great, but there's like that one thing that's lingering like in the back of your mind of like, ooh, I didn't get exactly what I wanted. Don't be afraid to ask at least 2 follow-up questions of, okay, what does career growth look like for this role? And they can't answer. Well, this is what my thoughts are on it, because I'm looking to potentially be this in 6 months. Or then following up with, how can I work with you to develop what career growth looks like? I think that will ensure the interviewer, like, oh, this is a person that's ambitious, knows what they want, without coming off potentially too pushy. Make it a collaborative kind of conversation. But it is a very fine line to walk.
And I would imagine it's also negative if you're too complacent, maybe. Is that also a red flag? Like if you're interviewing somebody, so on the other side of the spectrum, people that might be so uncomfortable, maybe so insecure with their own skills, they say, well, the less I say, it's kind of like talking to the police, right? Like nothing can be used against me if I haven't said it. Is there also a negative of if you are too quiet or not asking questions, or what the recruiter could also say, this person doesn't seem to have the ambition or the drive or the interest. They should have asked me more questions. So is there also, should our learners also be worried that, okay, you don't want to be too pushy, but if you are too complacent, that's also going to hurt you?
Yeah, I would actually say it is very possible, because ask any interviewer, if someone doesn't have any questions at the end of the conversation, that's usually like they had no questions for me. But if they don't, if you're very reserved, like I'm afraid to ask about like the culture, about the values of the organization, because I'm afraid if something comes up that I'm afraid to kind of push back on or to ask further about, it will only negatively affect me. I think it's always important to, you as a candidate, to know these things, these potential issues down the line, or potential things that will get you even more excited about the role, right? Because there are some times where, given a certain job market, you may actually have multiple opportunities going your way, and those little things actually might benefit you more. Like, oh, I remember, this person said this, and that's because I asked this one question, and then that informs your decision at the end. So it is very possible to be too complacent, but also I wouldn't say from an interviewer's perspective, they're like, oh, they didn't ask me too much about our culture, that's upsetting. It's usually just one of the things like, we didn't have as much of an engaging conversation, maybe, or that you might not be the same, they might not think of you the same way when it comes to a potential interview selection of like, okay, we have to hire X, Y, and Z candidate. Showing that interest in the organization and its culture is crucial, because I think a lot of technical organizations are now focusing a lot more on their values and their culture. So it shows buy-in, but also a desire to add to the culture.
I feel like it's similar to what Javane said last week when I was asking her about LinkedIn, and she said, well, I mean, I'm not gonna nix anyone for having a bad LinkedIn profile, but it doesn't add to your application either, right?
Yeah.
Like if you are a 0, it's not gonna take points, but it's not gonna give you points, and other candidates might have more points than you. It's sort of
it's almost like the SATs.
Yeah. I guess in this point, you don't ask. Yeah. it's sort of like, yeah, that, okay, you didn't ask me any questions, huh? But you could have asked some questions and get some extra brownie points, I guess. Like show that you're, because I mean, I think correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that one thing that people forget is that interviewers or like recruiters, you also have your to-do list, basically, like, okay, we are interviewing for this position, we have these requirements, this description. So you're also, not only you're recruiting in the sense of you're trying to see this person meets the requirements, but you're also trying to figure out how this person will add to the company and how they will fit in the overall company and how they would fit in teams and all this, right? So like, at the same time, these kind of questions might also give more of an insight for the recruiter to understand the kind of applicant that you are, the kind of candidate you are, right?
It gives everyone more insight. It's to go back to everyone's favorite test, the SATs. You get, if you don't swing for it, you're more than likely just going to get 0 points. If you get the answer right, you're going to get more points.
You don't lose points for getting negative.
If you get it wrong, you totally lose points, though. That's the other thing. It is very possible to ask the question in a negative way of like, because you also don't want to come off entitled, because I think sometimes it is easy when you're focusing on, okay, how can this organization contribute to me and how can I also contribute to them? It's easy to come off like, okay, what can they do for me? And that's where you start getting into those, negative points, but it only is in your benefit, because the most crucial thing is, that ad. It's an ad to everyone, to the team that you're potentially going to join, as well as your professional career. I think it's so crucial to ask questions around how can I add value, not just in terms of my skill, but in terms of who I am as an individual, being able to bring your authentic self to work every day. Because that's one of the other things about a really good culture you should be asking about. Can I be me at that job, right? And will I be respected? And will I be able to, by bringing my authentic self to work, contribute to the culture here? Can I join an ERG group or bring in, suggestions around events that we can do? Can we, themes when it comes to a hackathon, or even just a Slack channel that maybe didn't exist until I joined, right? And you'll never be able to know that unless you ask the right questions around what are the values of the organization? How does this organization, how can this role add value to the dynamic of the team? And if you don't go for that, if you don't kind of have that more, I'd say, altruistic tone in terms of those questions, where it's like, how can I add while also you guys helping me out in terms of my skill set as a young professional within this field? I think if you just kind of come from that more selfish, like, I just need experience so I can become, X, Y, and Z later on in my career. You want to avoid that, but that more focus on like, how can I add, is really crucial.
So I guess you can rephrase any questions that you might be thinking about ahead of time. Like, okay, I have my phone interview at 3:30 today. You write down some notes. So I guess you can try to rephrase that. Any questions, like, for example, you might be wondering about how often people get promoted or how much career growth there is in the role that you're going into. So I guess using that as a guiding principle of like, I want to contribute, but also see how the company's contributing to me. Then I guess instead of asking directly, hey, when was the last promotion an engineer got? You can ask something like, what are the career growth opportunities at this role? Or like, I guess you're just trying to rephrase everything in that kind of dichotomy of
definitely. And I think phrasing is so crucial, because it is such a delicate topic of values and culture, and also your just development, right? But it's all about the phrasing. And I would even say, not even like, tell me about the last promotion you had on your team, but just tell me how you facilitate growth on your team. Because growth doesn't have to be just promotions. It could be personal and professional growth, or just skill set growth, of course. And, having someone that's, because I like to say the best way you can get an understanding of the culture is the double check between the, if you've spoken to a recruiter and a hiring manager, looking for that consistency in terms of how they speak to the culture. If they come off two completely different things, that means those two teams may have different dynamics. Because that's the other thing we're seeing with remote cultures, is each team is starting to have a little bit of a different dynamic, right? But being able to look for that consistency, being able to, kind of touch on, okay, the hiring manager chat is that chance for you to really dig deep into, let's focus on my growth, or like the dynamics of that team. Because say it's almost like a filtering process. Like, oh, okay, the recruiter has told me that this is what this organization's values and culture is, and I like that. I like everything I've heard. Now this hiring manager is like, oh, this is the real, true, like second level deep of what this is. And then during that, like virtual onsite, or whenever it happens in the future, physical onsite, that is like, oh, now I have the clearest picture. So you should always think of each person as an ambassador towards those values, right?
Okay.
The further you get along, it's not just asking the recruiter up front. It should be at the front of your mind, and definitely having some questions prepared. Write them down. Ask your friends what they think the question, like of the questions. Do they sound too probing? Do they sound too softball? Are they just going to give you like cheesy answers? Or do they sound just right? Or if your friends are in the technical sphere, how would you answer that question? Do you think this is a good question to ask?
Answer out of the pamphlet, yeah, the corporate pamphlet. So,
yeah.
all right. So let's say that let's say our learners are thinking about this, and they're like, okay, yeah. So culture is important, mission, values, driven, everything important. Okay. I want to find out more about this in these companies. Do you know of any resources in particular that people can use, or like things that you could be mindful of? Like, for example, if you go to Glassdoor and you look at reviews, some people are going to have really bad reviews. You know, they exit the company in very bad terms, and obviously they're going to have 1 out of 5 stars, right? I guess you have to take that with a grain of salt. All the people have good reviews, I guess. How do you look at some of these resources like Glassdoor, or like reaching out in LinkedIn? What if you reach out to someone that is having a bad month? They're like, oh, don't come work here, you know, blah, blah, blah. Especially in bigger companies that can have thousands of employees. If you only go by the word of 1 or 2 people, might be, you might be actually not having the whole picture. So are there resources online that people can use to research culture and mission, and like, what are the caveats of doing this?
Yeah, no, it's definitely one of the tougher things for sure to kind of research, because you have a lot of skewed perspectives. Glassdoor is a skewed perspective of a company's culture, because you have almost like a tale of two cities. You have the best of times and you have the worst of times, both potentially like literally right on the same page, and potentially the same role, and potentially even the same manager. It's like, what happened here, right? But then what I found is a great resource in terms of the culture of a company is, so LinkedIn has a ability for you to kind of search employees of that company. If you just look at the people there, and this sounds kind of stalkerish, but seeing how active either leadership or like, just any manager is on LinkedIn in terms of talking about the things they're doing, the things they're participating in, or how they're being an ambassador for the organization, is a great way to see how engaged some folks are with the culture. Because it's one thing for an anonymous review, it's another for someone to use their professional profile to talk about the company, to talk about like, hey, I'm representing, generic tech company number 3, right? At X panel. Those folks are doing it because they're really passionate about their organization. And seeing if there's a lot of those individuals usually shows that it's a very engaged culture. These are people that want to talk about what their company is doing. I've seen some folks in my network who are, on diversity, equity, inclusion panels because they really strongly believe in what their organization is doing around diversity, right? And you wouldn't see that from someone who really did not like their job and like the values of that organization, because it would be very strange if their company didn't celebrate diversity and they were on a diversity panel. They probably wouldn't put themselves up to it. There is the potential, but they probably wouldn't do it.
Right.
So there are some fun little ways of seeing who's on there without having to send a LinkedIn connection or anything like that. You can just stalk the anonymous side of the internet, throw your LinkedIn profile on anonymous, and just look at some people that are at that company. And then also just seeing what the company's, social media accounts are doing. You can even sometimes find employees that are at that company that are talking about, or even retweeting or liking some of the statuses that the company is putting out on their social media brands, because they're bought in. But also just always be mindful of the people that drink the Kool-Aid. So always go into with the critical perspective. So that's where you get the holistic picture of looking at Glassdoor, looking at what people are saying in social media. If you get LinkedIn Premium, you can also see turnover rates. And then also then that all ties back into the interview, because being well researched is, always great. Don't be afraid to bring up, I wouldn't say never directly quote a negative Glassdoor review, just because you don't know who you might be potentially quoting there, but just trying to do like a synopsis of like, hey, I've noticed that a couple people have talked about, leadership seems indecisive, right? Can you just help me understand that? So kind of that more like not directly targeted question, like, hey, I've seen this because it shows you researched, because that also then ties back into, it'll only
So
help build your research.
So it's a generally bad etiquette during a phone interview to mention, hey, I heard that your company did this. I saw this in the news the other day, or I saw this article. Like, I'm worried about how this is affecting the role, or like, are you going to be in business in 6 months? Like, I don't know. Like, so it's a usually bad etiquette to frame. So if you're in a interview, you say, well, I'm worried that what these person's statement said goes against the mission or values, or this one employee was tweeting about this or something. So directly quoting that kind of stuff is usually a no. You want to be a bit more discreet or a bit more general in the sense of, hey, I've seen negative comments online, or I've seen certain discussions online, and I want to learn more about this or that, I guess.
You bring up a good point that I actually missed on, was to see if there was any articles online about like a company's culture. So that you bring up a good point of like, if there's articles that negatively reflect, like something has come out about an organization, something was said by X employee, how do you address it? You just have to be blunt with it. They probably are expecting those types of questions, to be honest. Like, okay, yeah, we know that article exists, let's talk about it. But be careful of the PR spin of, oh yeah, that was only, we've taken care of it, it's never gonna happen again. So just be very mindful of that. More than likely those interviewers are prepped. I would like to say, if you're interviewing a company where there's been this might be off topic, but a scandal, just be cautious, because maybe it's a really big company that you really want to work for, because it's going to be great for you, what you're going to feel in terms of fulfillment when it comes to your role. Like, I've always wanted to work for X organization, but they just had a scandal kind of thing. But just be mindful of that.
Somebody got fired for having a bad, some bad comments. They got put on administrative leave.
How are you handling that situation? What are you doing to correct it? But then also usually be prepared that those are going to be prepared statements, probably.
I mean, in your experience, how far do you think somebody can mold? Because we keep going back and forth, and you're interviewing them, they're interviewing you. I'm assuming that there's like a tug of war of trying to mold yourself to fit the profile that they're looking for, so you get hired, and at the same time not mold yourself so much that you're not yourself anymore, right? That you're just trying to fit the round peg, the round hole. So how far do you think that somebody can push it when it comes to neglecting things or ignoring things or red flags, or maybe they're not totally red flags? So how much can you like give up? You would say, like, are there things that you can just say, yeah, maybe that's not so important to me, or well, the brand, like if I put this company in my resume, I'm set. Like I survived 2 years here, I'll get a job anywhere I want. Is that, how far can you push it, really? Like in your experience, is that a bad thing, like to begin with?
I've actually heard candidates say, like, oh yeah, I toughed it out for X number of years at this company because I knew it was be good for my resume. That also speaks to the type of character that you are, in terms of what values you hold yourself to. That's like, oh wow, you put yourself in a situation that you didn't like just so you can get your next job. What does that say about us potentially, and how you think of your role going forward, right? Like, what's going to make us potentially any different in a way, even though we may be a better culture that's for you and that you can add to. But then that also ties into culture fit versus culture add. You're trying to, as you said, fit that square peg into that circle hole, where you're just trying to fit in, right? You're not your authentic self. I think bringing your authentic self to work as much as possible is super crucial. So it is very possible to bend and contort yourself to a culture, but as much as that is great, that like, okay, I'm setting myself up for future success, think about what that's going to do in terms of your job satisfaction. You may end up being one of those negative Glassdoor reviews potentially in the future. Think about your job satisfaction, your career satisfaction. Because I think looking back even at my career, I have tried to do culture fits, right? Where I'm like, I think I can, if I'm just here for, I can make it. Like it'll set me up for success. But did it really? Like, that's what it ends up becoming. Like, yeah, it probably helped immediately after, but did it really help me long term? Did I grow in terms of the skill set as much as I would have liked? Did I grow as much as I would have liked as a person, right? Because trying to get yourself to fit a culture, could potentially lead you to have some form of, I don't want to say chip on your shoulder, but almost like some, some hesitation or some pessimistic views on just culture in general, where maybe you won't be able to contribute to it going forward. Because
there's a lot of sarcasm, a lot of cynicism going around.
As someone that has a lot of sarcasm can exist without it being pessimistic. But I think, it's so crucial that people are able, they feel they can contribute to an organization's culture, because that's how you're like, I'm a valued team member once you start contributing above just what your day-to-day is in terms of like, lines of code, in terms of product shipped, but in terms of the joy that you bring to your team members, the events that you help your team, conduct and throw. Heck, man, you can be the trivia king at your company, and because you didn't do that any others, maybe your trivia game's weak. But just being able to do that will you'll have better connections going forward, no matter what. Those people are like, oh my God, I love working with them. Like you have now a network of referrals because you built true, genuine friendships. I should say, I never like the phrase, oh, we're all family here. Cause it's just, that's maybe the lines are getting too like you're dissolved between professional life and personal life, but being able to have strong friendships, that you have people that you're willing to hang out with after work, or experience extracurriculars with, or discuss, whatever pop culture topic is your fancy. Those people will always remember you going forward, so that the tech world is surprisingly small. Sometimes there are X number of companies and you'd be surprised, like, oh, I remember like 6 years ago, like, oh my God, I remember you. You were the trivia king of, our squad.
Mm-hmm.
That's a gateway in. If you're just trying to fit in, just go through it, no one will, I don't want to say no one will remember you. They'll be like, oh yeah, I think I remember them. I don't have any negative feelings. Like, that's not a glowing referral if that ever happens, right? Because recruiters do go like, hey, I see that this person worked at this company with you. If someone applies for a job, do you remember them? They're like, I don't think I do. You don't want that to potentially happen. So culture ad does have great ramifications down the line, where people will remember you. People will be like, oh my, like, even if it's your immediate team or the whole company, depending on how large the organization is, because you can stand out in a small team. You don't have to be an extroverted person to stand out in a small team or large team. If your efforts are noticed, for however you like to express your values and add to the culture of the organization, it will be noticed, and people either in that squad, team, or whole company will remember you going forward, so that if your paths cross in the future, it can lead to future opportunities. Versus, I did 6 months in X company and now I'm set for life.
Yep.
You might cross paths with them again in the future when looking for another opportunity. They might not remember you, or they
one of those people
like,
that become a YouTuber goes like X whatever. It's like, yeah, that's it becomes a title, like being a former employee of these companies, like X whatever. It's like, that's a title on its own. So it sounds like, yes, you can mold yourself, but what are the side effects and how much are you willing to sacrifice for that fit? It's kind of the situation. It's like, if you can avoid it and find a job where you don't have to do those things, it's going to be better for you in the long term. It's going to be better for everybody. So you can pull it off, but like, at what cost? It's sort of like,
do you want to go situation. Like, did I just waste a year, 2 years of my life? Like, you don't want to ever do that. Time is too short. This goes back to a great little anecdote I had from a physics professor back in the day, where he just, and this is not physics related, but he just simply said, we all spend our life thinking of the next thing after where we're currently at, right? When we're in high school, we're looking to graduate to go to college. When we're in college, we're looking to graduate to go into the workforce. When we have our first job, we're looking for our second job. We never enjoy that moment we're in. And it's so crucial to, definitely when you're a young professional, definitely with how the landscape is consistently changing, that if you have the skill set, you want to find an environment that you enjoy being in at the moment, that you're not thinking 6 months from now, 5 years from now, I'm at another company, right? Okay. You want to think of like, tomorrow I'm doing this. Think a little bit more immediate. It's always great to plan for the future, but don't go, I just want this done with so I can go on to the next thing. It should be, I really want to enjoy this. I'm here for the long haul kind of thing. And if the next thing is that I stay here, that's great. If it's not, whatever. But it's so crucial to enjoy that time you're in, to not have those like, I just wasted 5 years of my life
Yeah.
at this company for
Like you don't want to talk
what.
about it. It's kind of like, yeah, it was just a stepping stone, whatever.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I cause
It's a, but I mean, culture and mission and values, these intangibles are sort of like a bit emotional. They're a bit hard to describe. It's a spectrum more than a black or white, like you have them or you don't. So I would imagine that when you are interviewing for a role in a company, there's there's probably like part of you saying, well, I don't have that, but obviously I'm trying to grow, I'm trying to be a better professional. So uh, it's something that I could get into, right? Or it's something that maybe at this role I will learn about. So how do you, when you're interviewing, how do you know how much of it is your own fit and how much of it is you growing into being a better human being, a better professional, better in your role? Like, how
yeah,
is that? How do you know if that's okay? Yeah, this company is not what I'm looking for, or it's something like, well, I've never experienced this before. It's like trying new food. It's like, well, let me try it out. Let's see. Like, can you go with a mentality of like the recruiter tells you, yeah, this is our role, this is our growth opportunity, this is how we do mentorships, this is how we do mental health and stuff. Like maybe some of the things you're like, well, I never thought about that, or I never cared about that, or maybe I don't need that, but maybe I will. I don't know. So like,
yeah.
do you have to go with that mentality of like also being open to, because like you say, it's a culture ad, which means that you're the company's also and your coworkers also adding to you, like, right? It's a two-way street.
And that's the beauty of it. I think, one of the favorite things about culture, maybe bane to some people's existence, is that culture is not measurable. It's not as much as we try to objectify it, where it's like, okay, this is like, this lines up perfectly kind of thing. It is a very subjective field. It's a very feelings driven field. As much as we know the definitions for our values and what defines us as professionals on this team, it is very subjective. We can each interpret a word differently. Connotation versus denotation is a fun little concept, but I think what's super crucial is, yeah, it is a two-way street, because you're going to be as long as you're open to the culture of that organization, it's going to potentially change you as a person. If and the same thing with you to that organization. So just because like an organization has some type of value that maybe you disagree with potentially, doesn't mean you can't change the culture there, or they can change you. And don't feel like you're flip-flopping either, because that just means you've been exposed to different cultures, different facts, different information. But it's, you also have to be open-mindedness.
Okay.
Open-minded as well.
Because
Don't
I would
ever go
imagine,
in.
I imagine that a lot of people, especially when you're talking about tech, and I mean, this might be wrong for the rest of the world. I know that we have learners all over the world, but here in the US, with the way that some views are very polarized, sometimes people might be thinking, they already go with a mindset of like, well, Silicon Valley culture is this way or that way, or like you're already going. And I would imagine that that's something that the recruiter will also pick up on when they're talking to you, the candidate. They will also see that you might have some preconceived notions, so that you're expecting things to go in a certain way or play out a certain way. So I guess it's also important when you go into these interviews to go with that kind of like the beginner's mindset of, let's just see what it is for what it is. Let's leave the preconceived notions on the door and just find out what it is
Yeah,
for what
no.
they tell
And
you.
as much as it's a fact-finding mission for the company, for you, it's also a fact-finding mission for you to them. And to kind of tie it all back to Codecademy, it's about approaching it with a learner's mindset, because we all have our assumptions when it comes to certain companies, certain industries. Go in there wanting to learn, and you may find out that's not what you want, right? And that's fine. If you can be open to like, oh, they work on West Coast hours, or one of their things is, we're all family here, blood, sweat, and tears kind of thing. And I'm like, I don't know if I want to burn out. Like, that's not what I'm looking for. But then you kind of find out more, like, oh no, that's what that really means. Or you ask someone about like, hey, like, tell me about that perfectionism piece. These are all super cliched values, by the way, but
Yeah.
it's one of those things where it's like, what does that mean for you in your day to day? And they respond, and you may have that assumption of like, that to me screams this, that if I submit my code and it's got one issue in it, I might be on the chopping block. Where in fact, it's like, oh no, that just means we strive to get better. We strive to be perfect. We know maybe it's an unobtainable goal, but the fact that we strive,
Nobody gets 5 out of 5.
To push yourselves further. No one gets a 5 out of 5. We get 5.5s out of 5. Actually, we go beyond, right? But it's so crucial because even sometimes we read some of the values and maybe looking at a career plan, you go, I don't even need to read the definition. I know what that means, and you hear it in practice. It goes, oh, that what that means in action. And sometimes you even learn like, oh no, I thought this company held those values deeply close to the chest. I mean, it's all over their company page. Everything that they send out is hashtag this value or that value. And then you talk to the person like, oh, like, yeah, culture is a big part of our organization, but we don't like those values there. That doesn't really mean that much to the team. That may speak broader volumes to the overall company, but it will also show you like, oh, okay, so maybe I was concerned about some of these values, but in fact, it won't affect my day-to-day as much as I thought, right? It's going to be like when it comes to peer recognition awards, okay, now I see it. Like we'll get the, We Persevere award, right? It's, like that's rewarding. And it's not like, oh yeah, that value exists because we are under an onslaught of pressure and we, it's tough times ahead kind of thing. It's more of like, every job, every company, every role, every team has its ups and downs, and being able to work together through that is what we do. And that's how it all kind of ties back in, because you may first see, then go, what does that mean? Yeah.
Okay. Well, my last question before we go into the Q&A is, we've been talking about culture and how to fit in it and what it means and how to discover it and how to sort of measure it or understand it better. What is your thoughts after doing recruiting and for so long, having this experience with going through all the candidates? What are your thoughts on companies that pride themselves in their toxicity? Like, for example, you talk about, let's say, I'm not saying that they're toxic, but for example, you look at SpaceX that have a turnout rate of like 1.5 years or 2 years. Like people just burn out really quickly because they have really long hours. It's a lot of pressure. They're launching rockets, so things need to happen in a certain schedule, right? So you hear about these companies that might have a really high churn rate of their employees, but that everybody has that kind of mentality of like, yeah, we'll be here all night. And it's very college-like mentality of like, we just get the work done because it has to be done. No balance. Nobody needs the work-life balance. What is that? What are your thoughts in this kind of more toxic cultures? And like, some people are actually looking out for those cultures. So like, what are your thoughts if somebody says, no, I actually want that. I actually want to work at this company because they have 20-hour shifts.
Yeah. No, and that's the thing. That's totally fine. That's the beauty of it, right? Culture is something unique to everyone. Just because it's not my cup of tea, it could be someone else's. It could be that someone that wants to work those all-nighters, get stuff done, maybe just like go crazy in their day. They might see a company that has a very different mindset of like, hey, our hours are this to this, and that's it. If you are on after this time, what are you doing? They may find that culture not for them. And that's the beauty of it, right? Culture helps you understand, and the values of the organization help you understand, like, is this right for me? Because would you be happy to, let's kind of flip it a little bit, that person that wants to just, work those all-nighters, would you be happy and satisfied working for a company that doesn't? Do you feel like you'd be like, all right, I'm trying to ship something and no one's responding because it's 3 a.m. and no one's online, right?
Yeah.
Would you be happy at that company, or would you be more happy with a company that has that same mindset, right? Whereas like, we're all in this together, we're all pulling late nights, but then that does open up bigger can of worms of what is a healthy culture in general, which we'll kind of avoid for now. But that's important. It's like, is this what you want? And is that going to give you the same job fulfillment and satisfaction if you kind of are able to contribute to that culture? And I don't want to say just fit in, but contribute to that culture and add to it, right? Okay, we all work long hours and all that stuff, but maybe we put the blood, sweat, and tears now because we want the those quieter times after, or maybe there's peak season stuff like that. Because
the hardest person to know is yourself. How do you know? I mean, maybe you are like, yeah, I'm a hardcore. I want to do those all-nighters, and then you start the job, and like 3 months down the line, you said, you know what, I miss my bed. So do you have any tips, parting thoughts on how people can maybe understand themselves a little better, or like try to frame their thoughts a bit better so that when they're searching for this culture and these values, and they know themselves a bit better, so that you can have that contrast, like what you want, what you need, what you enjoy versus what the company is offering?
So some of it is learning by doing, right? Sometimes you join a company whose culture is just like, oh yeah, this isn't for me. You learn what you don't want, right? And then sometimes it takes the right company. It's like, oh my God, I didn't even know this is what I wanted in terms of the type of organization. Like, oh my God, I had no idea I want to be a part of a mission-driven organization. Sometimes those things just organically happen. That's one of the gambles of one's career is sometimes you think you want one thing, or you like, oh no, this is the type of culture I want. And then you realize, oh no, it's not, because you've been exposed by it. I like to say, look back at like, it's going to sound so cheesy, but what are your core values? What's your work style? Things like that. Start asking those questions early, but also during interviews, see what those companies are saying, what those individuals are saying to you during the interview process, to kind of piece together, am I similar to this person in terms of personality? And can I see myself being a part of this company's culture because I'm similar to them? So almost reflect yourself on someone else. But then also just don't be afraid to ask questions just of yourself of, okay, after that interview going, can I see myself working there? Can I see myself adding to that team? So just be consistently self-reflective if you want to avoid that learning by doing, right? Because there's nothing worse than joining a company's culture and go, yep, not for me. This is too slow paced, or, this team structure is not for me. I much prefer, a smaller, structure, or maybe I prefer when there's a whole bunch of us. So there's a bunch of people who can bounce ideas off of. It's sometimes learning by doing, and also networking, asking people their experiences is another great way to determine, okay, does that sound like what I like? Or does that sound like something I could add, my authentic self to?
Yeah, I guess that goes back to what we were talking about earlier, researching, seeing what people are saying online. Maybe, I mean, it's a big part of interviewing. I know that I've talked to other recruiters at Codecademy that keep, beating the drum on, hey, don't be afraid of reaching out to people that work there. Don't be afraid to reach out and ask questions. See if you can network with somebody. Ask them what they think, what they do. And I guess that also kind of gives you more of a window into what that culture and the fit is going to be like, and that value and those missions that the company is working on. All right. Does anyone in the chat have any questions for Jack today? Because we are in our Q&A, and I would love to ask him some questions. If anybody in the audience have questions, I think so far, somebody was saying that, yeah, their bar is very low. They have a compelling resume. I've been too broke to stay in comfort. So I guess that ties back to what we were saying, is like sometimes you're not too worried about the culture fit because you just need a job.
Yeah.
You're willing to sacrifice.
And also weigh your own life situation. That's an important piece. We're kind of speaking from a little bit of an area where you can have some options. If you, once again, never jeopardize your own physical well-being for, not taking a job. If it's that type of situation, you have to do it. Because that aligns up with what you need as an individual to feel, fulfilled, right? If you are in a situation where it's all or nothing, go all in. And, this is an ideal situation is that you don't have to, but there are some times where we as individuals have to compromise on our career aspects, but know where you can compromise. Is culture a place that you want to compromise, or do you want to compromise more in the hard skill area? Like, okay, maybe this job is, not going to push me as forward in this certain skill set as I would like, but the culture is great, right? Or maybe there's a company whose name maybe won't help lead me to my next big role or something like that. Understand where you're willing to, what do you really want, and then also where you're willing to compromise without just trying to fit in, just just making it work.
Someone asked if politics is off limits when you're interviewing, I'm assuming, because they said that they are in Brazil. Their current political climate is pretty intense. In my honest opinion, it reflects a lot in work environments. So politics off limits, I'm assuming that means you, the candidate, surfacing those, or I'm assuming.
That's a tough question, just because, yeah, I guess it's a kind of raising their concerns from a political perspective. I'd say politics shouldn't play that much into it unless you're working for a mission-driven organization, like an organization whose sole mission is this one thing and it aligns with, a political way, or it doesn't. right? I like to say if it's, like a government organization or something like that, I don't know. This is a very, very touchy subject, but I would say if it's that you really want to work for a mission-driven organization that aligns with your values, not so much your politics, just your values, and maybe their political, leaning is one way or other, just make sure it lines up with your values. I say organizationally, it's a little bit dubious because organizations try not to be that political at times.
Yeah, so this person is concerned about things, so political, but also, I guess, social, and things like homophobia, vaccinations, other requirements. Like there's a lot of topics nowadays that play into what people see themselves working at, and I guess the kind of workplace. Is there like a general etiquette for these sort of more touchy subjects? Like, is there a way of bringing this up during an interview in a way that it won't throw off the interviewer?
I'm gonna say that's tough.
Like if I was interviewing with you, you're asking me questions. I was like, we're the last 5 minutes. Like, hey, Fede, you have any questions? I go like, I'm a little worried about the vaccination requirements at Codecademy or something. Like, if I ask that question, we just kind of like take a step back. Like, is there like a good way of asking any sort of political, socioeconomic, or social in general questions without making it sound awkward or negative or pushy?
But I mean, this is all relatively new topics. Let's be honest. Right. So I think the beauty is I don't have an answer right now because I think it is very awkward in terms of it's very recent, kind of been pushed to the forefront a bit. But there's just the way of almost kind of tying it back of I just need to make sure this is of add value to both me and your organization. Just try to focus on the team versus just you as an individual to try to frame it in a little bit of a nicer connotation, right? Versus like give me kind of mentality, or just give me an answer. Phrase it like, so from the team's perspective, maybe phrasing like that. But this is all very fresh territory. I am so sorry. I don't have the best answer for you.
I mean, I know that sometimes you can just you can phrase it in your importance, your own framework, and say, well, this and that is very important to me. Can you speak a little bit about how the company fulfills this mission or how the company fits into this one area, right? Like maybe somebody's asking also, what happens if you feel like you've been led or manipulated during the interview to fit a role? And when you start, you find out that it's not what they said it was. Like, is there, I guess the real question is, how can you tell? How can you tell that recruiter isn't just painting all the rainbows for you because they're just desperate in hiring somebody for that role?
Yeah, I was actually going to say, because a company will always try to give you the best version of themselves during the interviews at times. Right. And the tough thing is that's where you have to marry it with your research, right? Because as much as you're interviewing them, that's also your time to research and kind of see how it all lines up. If something feels fishy, if something doesn't feel quite right in your gut, identify what those feelings are, what doesn't feel quite right, write them down, try to formulate them into questions so that, let's say they do move forward with an offer, you have questions for them. But the concern I can imagine the follow-up being, well, what if my questions put them off of me? What if they go like, oh, they're not bought in, and stuff like that. The big thing you have to say is frame your questions. I have gone through all these interviews. I really enjoyed everyone I spoke with. Would love to just ask, X, Y, and Z, just because I think it's going to give me a better understanding of this role and how it fits into the team or what this team is about, right? And how they operate. It's definitely a doozy because you don't want someone to feel like, what, were we not being authentic during our conversations? What, you don't think
I never said that
who we say we are? Yeah, it's like you never said that kind of thing. And if they get defensive like that, that actually might just be a flag in itself, right? If they suddenly go on the offense for your questions that are legitimate, because if they suddenly go, then maybe they aren't selling you their version of their most authentic version of what the company is and how it operates.
All right, last question that comes from me.
Oh,
how do you distinguish what is values, mission, and culture of a company with the perks they give you? So like if the perks are things like we have paternity leave, we have long paternity leave, we have perks for fitness, we have perks for books and study, we're going to pay for your credits so you can get an MBA. So how do you separate what is culture from those? Like, does those perks speak to the culture of the company you're applying for, or are they separate, should be seen as separate things?
They usually stem from the culture, right? There's something that motivated them to get those perks, but sometimes companies just put those perks just to keep up with the industry. Like, oh, we've seen, all of a sudden a company may go from having, very limited PTO or just your standard accrued PTO to suddenly unlimited. That's, probably just a sign of them keeping up with the times. So things like PTO, usually probably not culture, but if they have things like education, things of parental leave, some companies have a phrase on their company pages where it is underneath like what we offer. And then sometimes they even tie it into their values. Because we believe in being lifelong learners, we provide this educational perk. Or for example, because we believe in work-life balance, we have these different perks that focus on that. Unlimited PTO, great paternity leave and maternity leave plans. After X amount of time, be able to take, sabbatical, or even someone's like, we're about coming together. We do big company meetings out in, camp in the woods. Like that sounds fun and exciting, but also kind of ties into their culture. But I like to say anything that's kind of like monetary focused, always kind of be like focused on where is this coming from? And does this tie back to one of their values, right? Mm-hmm. If they have an educational, like let's say they have a tuition reimbursement plan, that is a flat out just straight up perk. But if they tie it into the reason, we are lifelong learners, we believe, we do a tuition reimbursement plan because we want our employees to continue to learn, whether it be a new degree or a new, like, see how it starts tying back together. That is an example of that. It is in fact a part of their culture. If it's just there for the sake of being there, it's just a perk. It's just there because they are trying to be competitive within the market. So look what the company's values are and then go right to the perks page and see what's going on. See if there's any overlap. But it is very easy for a company to say, this is our culture. It's a list of perks. Like,
yeah. Great. Free food, free things, free time, free everything.
Like who doesn't want a free, who doesn't want a foosball tournament every Friday? Actually, that might actually be an actual true example of the culture because everyone there is really into foosball, or they just happen to have a foosball table there and no one plays on Friday, right? So actually are there still foosball tournaments on Friday? Not now because of pandemic, but if someone's able to come up with a virtual foosball tournament on Fridays, bravo to them. That means it is an important part of their culture.
All right. Got it. Well, thank you so much for stopping by today on the live stream.
Thanks.
And any parting thoughts for anyone that will watch you in the future?
Always remember interviewing is a two-way street. It is so crucial that you give them the best interpretation of who you are, both as a professional and as a person, but also you get the best understanding as to what the role entails in terms of the skills required of the position, as well as, the company's culture that you can potentially add value to. Do you see yourself being there and being able to be a part of whatever they do going forward? So just always remember it's a two-way street, and never try to just compromise on what makes you and what's most crucial to you.
That's fair. Thank you so much for stopping by today.
No, Fede, thank you for having me and for doing all these.
All right. Awesome. Goodbye, everybody, and see you next week with another episode of Recruiting Tips and Tricks.
Bye-bye.
And that is the stream. We're ready to go.